Major Hurricane Fiona is actually getting more major even as we speak. An Air Force reconnaissance aircraft is there, and we're going to let you know what it found. We also have Tropical Storm Gaston in the central Atlantic, not the tropical Atlantic, the central Atlantic, and we have a strong tropical wave in the tropical Atlantic. So we're going to talk about all three of them, all three systems. And meanwhile, the weather in much of the eastern two-thirds of the United States was looking good today, but the east awaits the arrival of a cold front that will bring autumn weather just in time for the arrival of autumn on Friday. All that and much more on tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York. It's Southwest Suffolk County on Long Island, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area with everything you need to make sure your home looks good, works well, and is protected, that you're protected in case there is some adverse weather. So if you need a new generator or a sump pump, or maybe you're thinking, I got to get the yard looking good for the autumn and I have to replace the mulch or the topsoil, you can get it all at Omni. 631-756-1125 is the telephone number, and the website is...
I do believe that the website for this fine establishment is omnitruevalue.com.
Yes, it is. And
an artifact of the end of the coverage of the burial of Queen Elizabeth yesterday.
God. All right. So we have I already have the satellite loop because, and I use the wide shot just to give everybody perspective here. Fiona is strengthening rapidly this evening, and we're going to check the reconnaissance aircraft in a moment, but I wanted to just at least give you a view of this as it is about 75. The last advisory, it was about 75 miles north of Caicos Islands in the southeastern Bahamas, and it's 760 some odd miles southwest of Bermuda, where we have tropical storm watches up. And if you look on the screen there, right in the middle near the top, that is Gaston, which has developed in the central subtropical Atlantic, or is on the far northern edge of the subtropical Atlantic. And you can see its center convection is wrapping around the center. And to the south of the tropical Atlantic, we have a tropical wave that is producing showers and thunderstorms. The activity's increased, but it's not well organized yet. But everything points to the fact that as this goes through the Windward Islands and gets to the eastern Caribbean, that this is going to strengthen into a tropical depression or a tropical storm sometime in the next several days. So busy, Mr. Rayo.
Well, right now on Fiona's hit parade, and you mentioned the situation regarding Turks and Caicos Islands through this afternoon, life-threatening flooding there, localized additional flash and urban flooding still possible in Puerto Rico. By the way, the latest in Puerto Rico is 20% of the island. About 20% now have regained electricity. This is the folks in Puerto Rico who are insisting that the entire island will be back with electricity from one end of the island to the other within the next several days, not the next several weeks, as was the case in the aftermath of Maria, but slowly but surely the electricity is coming back in Puerto Rico. Hurricane conditions, of course. Joe, you mentioned how the storm is strengthening literally by the minute. Hurricane conditions are affecting Turks and Caicos Islands, while tropical storm conditions should affect portions of the southeastern Bahamas during the next several hours. Meanwhile, Bermuda, I'm kind of surprised that they only, quote unquote, only have a tropical storm advisory posted, because I want to tell you the latest forecast track that I looked at from NHC has Fiona passing very close to Bermuda late on Thursday or Thursday night, And by that time, the storm could very well be packing winds of 125 to 140 miles per hour. So we've been saying how resilient Bermuda is whenever one of these big storms passes them by. It'll be interesting to see how they take on Fiona's effects in a couple of days. And then finally, if that weren't enough, Fiona, which would still possibly be a Cat 2 hurricane, is expected to pass through the Cabot Strait. Where's the Cabot Strait, you may ask? That's a 60-mile wide channel between the southwestern part of Newfoundland and the northern part of Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. And I did a little bit of research, Joe, and it looks like Fiona could very well have the potential to rival Hurricane Igor back in September of 2010, which was the most destructive hurricane ever to strike Newfoundland, as well as the worst storm of tropical origin ever to hit Newfoundland since 1935. We're talking about a storm, we mentioned this last night, that even though it'll be in a weakening trend by Saturday, if it kicks off the day on Saturday still at about 100 miles per hour, the forward speed of this thing, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, added on to the circulation of steady or sustained winds, could very well make this a very, very potent storm. And since it looks like the storm is going to be passing along the the western side of the island of Newfoundland, that place is literally the whole island in the worst possible place you want to be in terms of a tropical cyclone. So this will be one for the books, perhaps for Newfoundland, possibly even Nova Scotia as well. So this, somebody said yesterday or the day before, you think that maybe they're going to retire Fiona? Most definitely they're going to retire Fiona after what it's done to Puerto Rico, what it's doing right now to Turks and Caicos, what it may do to Bermuda, and what it may very well do by the weekend up in the Maritimes of Canada. This has been one wild and woolly storm, and only the first of what appears to be, as you said, Joe, 3, not 1, but 3 tropical systems that we'll be watching carefully over the course of the next week or 10 days.
Yeah, I'm with respect to Bermuda, I guess they're looking at the track models. It looks like the core of the hurricane force winds will probably pass to the west, just northwest of Bermuda. It's going to be close, but just northwest of Bermuda, and they certainly would get tropical storm force winds. And there's plenty of time for them if it looks like it's going to be a little bit more to the right that they could wind up adding a hurricane watch. This is going to be for late Thursday night for them. And as we talked about yesterday, and I've spoken about this many times, the people of Bermuda are a resilient bunch. They have gone through these things before, and some of them have caused damage. And then you look at them a week or two later, and everything's repaired. It's as if nothing happened. So right. I think, barring anything really extreme, that they'll probably come out of this the same way. Looking at what's going on up in the Canadian Maritimes. One of the things that I think is a variable here is going to be, we mentioned yesterday, this thing's going to be moving at about 50 or 60 miles an hour. So there's going to be momentum added to the wind on the east side of the center, and the rain, as the system gradually becomes post-tropical, which it will do. You'll see the process when the heaviest rain shifts to the west side, and then the strongest winds are not that there aren't strong winds on the west side, but the strongest winds will be on the east side. But this could still, even in that case, this could still wind up being a rather strong tropical system. As you mentioned with Igor, I immediately thought of Young Frankenstein, and I thought Igor. We're on the same page with regards to this. I'm going to bring up the latest reconnaissance aircraft. While I'm doing that, just want to say good evening to everybody and welcome to the Joe and Joe Weather Show. If you are new to the Joe and Joe Weather Show, we're on every night from Monday through Thursday at 7:30 and Sundays at 11 a.m. We usually take Friday and Saturdays off, but in the event that there's something going on of major proportions, we may just be on this Friday night. to cover what might happen up in the Canadian Maritime provinces. So please become part of the conversation and join the folks on the chat board, the regulars there. It's nice to see when new people join in on the conversation. And if you're watching this show on replay and you really like it, you can hit the thanks button and hit the tip jar. It's not a requirement, just letting you know that it's there in case you might feel generous. And for those of you who are watching the show and like the show, hit the like button, because Joe and I like when people like our show. So here's the reconnaissance aircraft. I'm going to get myself out of the way here. And it's in there right now, and I'm thinking they are going to up the winds at least to 125, maybe even 130. I don't know what they specifically found, but I'm thinking they got to jump it at least 10 miles an hour here, Joe, based on what I'm seeing on this reconnaissance report. The pressure is now down 10 millibars in the last 3 or 4 hours, 953 millibars, and to the east of the center, we are seeing the white, well, let's call it off-white. It's hard to see it because you see the light purple, and that is the 113 to, I'm sorry, the pinkish wind barbs there. The white wind barbs are 96 to 113, and they match the colors of the satellite, so they look like there's gaps there. That's actually because there's white wind barbs. But the pink, we've got pink wind barbs, which if you look at the scale at the bottom, is 113 to 137 knots. So I'm thinking at least when they do that, I'm going to at least think they're going to raise it to 125 and maybe even up to 130 miles an hour. And you can see on the floater loop here, as it goes to enhance. First of all, look at that feeder band. Look at that feeder band, Joe, on the east side. I mean, that's probably where those 113 knot plus winds are occurring. And the eye, which I think was probably undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle today because the eye structure was there, but it filled in with clouds. Well, guess what? On the last couple of visible frames, and now you're looking at it on the enhanced frame, the eye is becoming much better defined as it moves. And it's looking like it's moving maybe 350 now, or possibly even 360 or due north at 9 or 10 miles an hour. It's still not moving at any kind of getaway speed. It eventually will accelerate to the northeast, but it may take another day or so for that to happen. But you're seeing a really well-defined core, and I don't think it's done strengthening here. We might see this thing drop down into the 930s now before this strengthening cycle is over with.
Oh, I agree, Joe. And I think that we saw a number of different models yesterday kind of pointing toward Cat 4 category, and it's looking more and more like that is going to come to fruition. Whether or not it might briefly even touch Cat 5, that's debatable. But at this moment in time, who really cares between a strong Cat 4 or a weak Cat 5? I mean, this is a monster. This is by far and away the biggest tropical system we have seen so far this year. And again, the folks who live in Bermuda, they're going to have to keep a real close watch, because this thing is probably going to be just about at its peak as the storm is passing it by in a couple of days. And then the sheer momentum of, again, the rapid movement as it gets picked up by the stronger upper level winds late in the week into the weekend, the sheer momentum of the storm certainly will go quite a ways to offset the fact that it'll be passing over cooler waters. It's still going to be a very, very dynamic, a very, very robust storm system when it reaches the Maritimes first thing on Saturday. And that's why I think folks in the Maritimes really need to be concerned about this, because, again, you talk about some of the legendary storms that Nova Scotia and Newfoundland have had to put up with. Igor is one. Another would be Juan. That was back about 20 years ago. So this most definitely is going to be a storm to be reckoned with, even for the folks who live up in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and dare I say also Labrador. I mean,
Yes.
Labrador doesn't see very many of these kind of systems, but Labrador may very well be hit hard on Sunday with this as it moves northward. And who's to say maybe Iceland? I don't even know.
Well, when I pull up the GFS, it'd be interesting to see if there's any snow at that point when it's post-tropical on the west side. Meanwhile, the 5 p.m. advisory, we'll have the 8 p.m. advisory shortly. So it's at just a second here, folks. There you go. 22.6 north, 71.8 west. Maximum sustained winds at the advisory time were 115 miles an hour. Now, bear in mind that the last reconnaissance report that they had was from 1 o'clock this afternoon. So there's a plane there every 6 hours. So there's not much new information other than the data that they get off the satellite and the satellite passes that they do. But now we have the plane telling us that I believe the pressure was somewhere in the low 960s on earlier today, and now we're down at the low 950s. Moving north-northwest at 8 on that advisory. Be interested to see what they carry on the new one in terms of the direction. And they've got the M for major, and you see the track through midnight Thursday. It's just still a crawl. Then it starts to pick up forward motion here. So by 2 p.m. Thursday, and by 2 p.m. Thursday, it's still, well, let's say less than 300 miles, maybe less than 200 miles southwest of Bermuda by 2 p.m. Thursday. By 2 a.m. Friday, it's almost even with Bermuda, taking a track just north and west of the island. Again, my suspicion is that the core will probably be just north and west, and that Bermuda will experience gales and maybe some pretty strong wind gusts, but perhaps they won't get into that core where the winds are 100 mile an hour plus. And then 2 p.m. Friday, it's on the same it's at about 37 degrees north here, roughly, and about 64-ish west. And then 24 hours later, it moves 600 miles, and it's on the eastern tip of Nova Scotia. It looks like it's a little bit slower. Just a little bit slower. This would suggest that maybe it will be later Friday night into Saturday afternoon that Nova Scotia sees the worst of it. By 2 p.m. Sunday, as Joe pointed out, it's up in Labrador, and certainly by then it should be a post-tropical cyclone. In the meantime, let's check out the track model guidance from this afternoon, and you can see that all the intensity models for the next 96, 108 hours either have it as a Cat 4 or a Cat 3. And then after that, you start to see the effects of, well, maybe you start to see things turn extra tropical. Remember, 96 hours is 4 days, and it's Tuesday. So you're looking at Cat 3 conditions. This is from 2 o'clock this afternoon. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 2 p.m. Saturday, it's still being shown by some of the intensity models as being a Cat 3. There's more of them are showing it more as a Cat 2 on the intensity models at that point when it's starting to. But again, we have to see what the impact is of the upper air dynamics with this deep trough in the east and its impact on the storm. And here's what's been interesting about this, Joe, with the model intensity guidance. First off, the hurricane tracking models, the easternmost model is still, a good 70, 80 miles to the northwest of Bermuda in terms of its track. So all the track models take it to the left of Bermuda. But the one thing that's happened in the last couple of days that we've seen the tracking models gradually shift to the left, going from if you remember back just a few days ago, it was over eastern Newfoundland, and then it was over western Newfoundland, and now we've got the center. A lot of the track models taking it, as you said, near was it Cape Breton Island?
Well, between Cape Breton and southwestern, right through the Cabot Strait, that little area of water between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland is called the Cabot Strait. And for all intents and purposes, it's either going to be in the Cabot Strait or over Cape Breton Island, it appears, during the day on Saturday.
Okay, it's 7:51. Let's see if there's a new advisory out from the National Hurricane Center, folks. And there is not a new advisory out yet. So we'll check back in a few minutes. In the meantime, why don't we take a look at the well, I'll save Gaston for last, but let's take a look. Let's go back to Fiona. That's what we'll do. We'll go back to Fiona and we'll look at what the model. I'll show you on this wide shot here of the North Atlantic, so you can get really a full perspective not only of the tropics but of the North Atlantic, of the U.S. east of the Rockies, and you can see Fiona here. This is the GFS 12Z run. I haven't switched to the 18Z run, but let's use the 12Z run for now. And you see the pressure gets down to 944, 945, 945, 944 when it's near at its closest pass to Bermuda, 944, 938, 932. Now, it would be really unusual that to lay this if it. Most of the time, Joe, I would discount these pressures drop, what the GFS is showing with this 932 pressure, and then down to a 928. It's probably overdone. But I don't want to discount the fact that you've got this deep upper trough that's going to interact with this. So we might see some strange things here ultimately. In fact, if you notice, by the way, it takes actually in 6 hours, it takes this sort of jog to the left. Right there.
Right.
And then it just resumes its north. That's probably with the reacting with the cold upper low.
Exactly. And that, by the way, goes back to something that you and I remember back from now we're showing our ages here. The 1970s, there was a gentleman who worked at the what is now WPC, the World Weather Prediction Center. Gentleman's name was Rosenblum, and he wrote a paper stating that intensifying or rapidly intensifying cyclones or storm systems tend to turn to the left during their period of rapid intensification. And if anything, it's doing a Rosenblum turn to the left when it interacts with that upper trough, when Fiona interacts with that upper trough later in the week and into the weekend. And that's exactly why you see that, as Joe mentioned, the jog, if you will. Instead of going on that smooth turn to the north and northeast, all of a sudden, on Friday night, Saturday morning, all of a sudden the storm suddenly takes this jog back to the west or back to the northwest for a time. And yeah, that's baroclinicity. That is the joining together or the mergence of a very potent tropical cyclone with a very significant upper trough. You get the two together, and as the late, great Tex Antoine used to say, sometimes in such situations, this system here and this system over here are going to get together, and they're going to have a party. And the party, it looks like, is going to be, unfortunately, in the vicinity of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland come on Saturday.
Yeah, I've got the upper air. I just showed the surface while you were talking. It showed that jog. Here's the upper air. And the trough we're talking about here is this, right over here. Okay? You've got this really strong south-southwest flow moving it along. At 18,000 feet, Joe, I'm looking at some of these wind barbs, 80, 90 knots. In some cases, southeast of Nova Scotia at the 500 millibar level. I mean, that's not even inside the main jet, which is just to the left of that, where we've got 100 knot plus winds in that dark red, and it's a very, very sharp trough. And there you see on the right near where you see 60 West, right down here, that big brown circular area, that is Fiona. And look how wrapped this is that post-tropical process getting underway. Look how wrapped up this thing is. I mean, that is very impressive.
Now we have somebody on the chat board who is located apparently in Nova Scotia, Dub. So Dub, he's saying this is definitely looking mean for us now. I'd be interested to know, Dub, where you are. Are you in the vicinity of Cape Breton Island, or maybe you might be lucky enough to be all the way over on the far western side of Nova Scotia, around Yarmouth, for example, or even Halifax, which is kind of like west central Nova Scotia, but the spot that looks like it's really going to get its kicked in Nova Scotia will be the far east in Cape Breton Island. And let's not also forget the folks who live, Joe, on Prince Edward Island.
Yes.
And Charlottetown, they too are going to get part of this. And then that system will move on up and go after Newfoundland Island, the western end of Newfoundland Island, it would appear, again, during Saturday.
Also, to our friend on the chat board, if you just also could let us know, I'm just kind of curious as to what kind of coverage this is getting up in where you are in Nova Scotia. And by the way, for the snow lovers, as I mentioned earlier, if you notice, I've got the actual radar overlay here, and there's the beginning of some blue in Labrador, so somebody's going to get some heavy snows out of this as it moves on up to the northwest. Maybe if this were a little deeper into the month of October, you probably see a larger area of snow develop there in southeastern Canada. But the other thing is also note that at this point, as we this is Friday night, 8 o'clock. This is position here is 2 a.m. Saturday. Very heavy rains going on in Nova Scotia. Not so much in Newfoundland. Even in western Newfoundland, there are some heavier downpours, but the real heavy rain now shifts to the west side. And again, the strongest winds will be on the east side. And there you go, as it makes its final it completes its transition to post-tropical. Just want to bring up the 10-meter wind if we have it, and I do have it. So here's the 10-meter wind. And the that purple area are sustained winds of 50 knots or more. And just offshore in that brown area, wonder how Sable Island is going to handle all this. But in that sort of reddish brown area, those are sustained winds of hurricane force or higher. So it says, to say nothing of what the gusts will be east of the center. I mean, you're going to see absolutely wicked gusts to the east of the center, and then the wind again on the west side will be strong, but it will be it'll be a little less strong because you got the momentum. You have to add the momentum on the east side and subtract it a bit on the west side. And then, of course, you can see how the winds just sort of subside once the low gets into Labrador and is all spent out now by the time we get to Sunday night. So, again...
Dub lives, by the way, Dub lives in Halifax. So he's not quite into... I mean, he'll get his fair share of heavy rains and winds and everything, but he's not going to be in the big zone of strong winds. That, again, is going to be... confined to Cape Breton Island and places on the east, and also again for Prince Edward Island as well. That's going to be ground zero for the folks in the Maritimes for Fiona this weekend.
The new advisory is out, and we have at 22.9 north, 71.7 west, or about 75 miles north of Caicos Island, or about 775 miles southwest of Bermuda. Maximum sustained winds down 125 miles per hour, so they up the winds another 10. Moving north-northwest at 335 at 8, and the pressure that they're carrying on the advisory is 2 millibars lower than what we had on the recon now, so they must have another fix there, 951 millibars. So it seems like the system is strengthening at about 2 millibars an hour, which is considered rapid strengthening.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Johnny Quest has asked the question, Joe, wasn't the perfect storm in 1991 a hurricane at one time? And if I recall correctly, if memory serves me, and can you believe this, Joe? Can you believe that the perfect storm was over 30 years ago? I can't even believe that.
I guess so.
But, there was a hurricane. It was Hurricane Grace, but the upper level wind, the upper level disturbance that literally carved its way down into the northeastern United States was far more potent. It actually, what else can I possibly say except it it devoured Grace, or it ate Grace, or did
They
it?
sort of became one.
Yeah, yeah. But Grace was not really a potent I mean, maybe I think it was a Category 1, or just, hedging on a Category 1 storm. Now, if you saw the movie, The Perfect Storm, it made it sound like Grace was much more potent and much more of a factor. But actually, what it was really was this amazingly strong upper level closed low system, which dropped on down over the Northeast and combined with the remnants of Grace, which produced the so-called perfect storm. But that was late in the
Yeah.
That was much late. That was around Halloween.
Right, the
We still
Halloween
have
the Halloween storm. I think we were kind of referencing that as the Halloween storm, and also, as I recall, that upper low actually came in from the northeast, which was really unusual. I mean, you get upper lows that drop down along the east coast from time to time from eastern Canada, and sometimes out there they'll drift around, but they usually don't have any big impact with regards to the weather. Much beyond nuisance stuff. But in this particular case, the whole upper low just sort of bodily came down southwestward to a position that was not too far offshore, and of course it created tremendous tidal flooding in parts of New England and down into the northern mid-Atlantic states. So it was very, very unusual. Having trouble right now downloading all the extra frames here because I wanted to get. You know what? I'm going to shorten the loop up because all that flashing is annoying. So let's shorten the loop up a little bit. And I want to just focus a little attention on this tropical wave, which earlier today looked like the convection was really blowing up, and now there's showers and thunderstorms there, but it doesn't look overly organized. Nor do I expect it really to become organized until probably once it gets into the Windward Islands, and that'll be another 36 to 48 hours from now. So it's at that point that Fiona will be far enough north that its influence down in the Caribbean, you'll have a trough that'll be lifting out. So any shear that's going to be in the Caribbean is going to be replaced by an upper high to an extent, and that should allow this particular system to strengthen as it moves on westward. The Hurricane Center's got an 80%. I don't think they changed it, but let me just real quick check on the map. Yeah, they now have a 70% probability in the next 48 hours of this becoming either a tropical depression, or becoming a tropical depression. 70% in the next 48 hours, 90% probability in the next 5 days. This is going to develop into a tropical storm, in my view. The system continues to show signs of organization. It will likely become a tropical depression within the next 2 or 3 days. That's the way it is worded. So who knows? You might wake up to find a new depression tomorrow morning. And as far as Gaston is concerned, just really quick, it's at 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time at 34.7 and 44.4. Okay, so it's way out there. And as a reference point, it is 990 miles west of the Azores. Max winds of 40 miles an hour, moving north-northeast at 17, moving 020 degrees, and they're estimating a minimum central pressure of 1,009 millibars. And if you look back on this loop where I have that circle drawn in the upper part, right in the middle in the upper part, that is Gaston. Kind of like Danielle in a way. By the way, there are more tropical waves coming off the African coast. So all of a sudden, the major development region is very busy. So I think that means that we probably have more storms to deal with down the road. I don't know which one of these are going to develop, but we're probably going to see a few more names get out of the way, perhaps before the month is over. The interesting thing to me with respect to the next system, and actually, Joe, somewhat remarkable in that you look at the European, you look at the GFS, and you look even at I didn't look at the Canadian today. We'll look at it now.
I did, and it's not on the same exact page as the European or the GFS, but if you want to just look at it in a broad brush sense, and you're looking for something to be in the Gulf of Mexico,
Right.
it's there. It's there on the Canadian, but it's much further to the south and to the west,
Yeah, it
as
crosses.
opposed to the European.
The other two models keep, since yesterday, insisting that it takes a right turn once it's past Jamaica and goes into the eastern Gulf. The Canadian is a little further west, takes it into the Yucatan Peninsula and into the southwest Gulf. But they all three of the global models have it. So
Right.
I think that lends a lot of credence to the idea that there is going to be something developing in the Eastern Caribbean out of that tropical wave. I just find it remarkable looking at the GFS and the European. Their positions aren't exact, but they both basically take it to the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. And considering that we're talking 8 or 9 days from now, it's just been every single run. And I was thinking about the fact that there have been instances that you and I, the blizzard of '96 comes to mind, Joe, where the long range models picked up on this in the long range and just locked into it and never let go.
Right. Right. Also, the great December nor'easter of 1992. That's another example. Sometimes you get these systems where all the models just it's like a red flag warning, or they all raise red flags well in advance, 5, 6, 7, 8 days in advance, saying you better watch out for this one. This one looks, and it doesn't. And the thing that is not scary or frightening, but the thing is that each day that you get closer to the quote event, it doesn't back off, and it doesn't show any signs of diminishing. In fact, if anything, it shows signs of strengthening. And this is, this opens your eyes when you see, the two systems, the two models, the GFS and the European, more or less putting a potent tropical system in the same area of the Gulf of Mexico 10 days out. And then you see the Canadian model, which always seems to want to go its own way, also alluding to some kind of a disturbance in the Gulf the same time. That opens your eyes, and that makes you wonder, interestingly, on Saturday, October 1st, in Central Park that evening, there's going to be something called Starfest. The Amateur Astronomers Association of New York is going to be meeting to celebrate amateur astronomy. And they're going to have, I guess, a get-together where they're going to set up telescopes for the public. And my boss at the Hayden Planetarium, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, contacted me a few days ago and said, "Hey, Joe, would you like to join me with this so that we can, talk about stuff?" And he has a podcast, which some of you may be aware of, called Star Talk. And Dr. Tyson asked me to join him. And I emailed him this afternoon, and I said, "Is there another date possibly that we could have this?" I said, because what I'm looking at is a possible hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico on Friday, the day before. And I said, on the day of the Starfest, October 1st, who knows? This thing could be coming up along the Atlantic seaboard, and there may not be much reason to have a Starfest that night. So I'm asking him, is there any rain date or whatever? And I told him, I said, we're not going to pull the whistle string just yet. I mean, this is still like 8, 9, 10 days out. I said, but I just wanted to make you, Neil, I wanted you to be aware of what may be headed our way at about that same time that all of these festivities are supposed to be happening. Again, very unusual to have any sort of confidence, that far out. But when you see the major long-range models, Joe, all saying the same thing, basically, that there's going to be some kind of a major tropical system at a specific spot, let's say on the 30th of September, and then, you do a little bit of extrapolation here, and you suggest that maybe that might have an effect on the eastern seaboard. And still a long ways out, but still
long
ways out. But you still have to make a note, maybe in the back of your mind, that the trouble may be a brewing by the end of the month or the beginning of the new month of October. And yeah, since we already have Gaston, this in all likelihood would become the H storm, which would be Hermine or Hermine or Hermione. I don't know. We had one.
Hermine, I think that's how they pronounce it.
Hermine.
Hermine.
Hermine. Yes.
Let me just point out something that translated what you said to Dr. Tyson is, I can't possibly do it. I have a show to do. You know, you know.
I'm going to be on the air. Hey, you know what? You know what? If we do end up doing something that night, maybe I can do. We could do a Joe and Joe, and I could use my wonderful iPhone, which I was forced to purchase thanks to Renata, and maybe we can actually have Neil deGrasse Tyson do a quickie guest shot on Joe and Joe. That would be interesting.
By the way, because I told you this last night, guess who's going to be in Florida next? Maybe in Florida. I haven't 100% for sure, but guess who may be in Florida next week?
Is it? Let me guess now. I think the initials are JC.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll be on the East Coast, but I don't know yet. Still be another day or two before I find out and decide. But I may be on the East Coast of Florida all next week. So it'll be interesting to see if we wind up seeing a storm. It looks like it would be in the Gulf of Mexico, but again, it's a long way off. Let me just acknowledge a couple of things because we had 2 super chat hits. Mike Wells hitting super chat, and I think Mike is new to the chat board. Welcome, Mike. Most appreciated. I'm living in Southwest Florida. Moved from Long Beach last year. I'm kind of curious how. Well, we're talking about it right now, Mike. So yeah, it's a long ways away, and there's a couple of things that I want to get point out, which I'm going to do on the maps shortly. The other super chat hit. Thank you very much, by the way, for hitting the tip jar. And the other super chat hit was
Mayfire
924. And if Hermine hit Florida, is it the same name as 2016? Yes, it's not retired. Was not retired. Didn't do anything spectacular in 2016. And I think it's been used a few times. So it'll be used again. Now, if it becomes something of consequence, then yeah, but that's way down the pike here. 54 likes so far. Thank you for hitting the like button. Let's see if we could try to get it over 100 tonight. So if you haven't hit the like button, please hit the like button, because Joe and I love it when you hit the like button, because you know why? It says you like us, which is important. So let's go. I want to go back to the model thing. I had the European up before I brought us back up full screen, so I'm going to go back to what the models are doing here, and of course I got to get myself out of the way, which I just did. So take a look. This is the 18Z GFS, all right, and you obviously see Fiona making its way toward Nova Scotia, and you also see the low that's in the Eastern Caribbean moving west. Pressure drops to 999, 998, 995. It's a little further south of Jamaica than it has been in past runs. And then it starts to turn northward and intensifies, moves over western Cuba, just the tip of western Cuba, into the eastern Gulf. And on the new run, it's up in the Florida Panhandle. And this, I'll leave it when it's offshore. This is at 2:16, so that's 9 days from now. So that's next Thursday. Okay. Now look at the European for the same time frame, and it's just to me, the fact that both models are in such lockstep. We complain all the time, Joe, when we see them doing things that are completely 180 degrees, opposite of what one model is doing versus the other. This is an instance where they are in absolute lockstep and have been for days now with this. So it certainly lends the confidence to the idea that there is going to be something of importance. Now, what the other thing, the more complex part of all of this, and let's just I want to give everybody some context. We've got to look at the upper air here, because that really ultimately is going to be the driver, obviously. And at least when we start off, here's this deep trough. I'm rolling it back now. So now we're at the end of this week, and you see the deep trough in the east, and you could also see how mechanically how it works, where it picks up the storm Fiona, which if I started here in the Bahamas, you've got this trough right now moving off the coast of New England right there. Now that trough is missing Fiona. Fiona is, if this trough were stronger, Fiona would be going like this already, turning
Right.
northeast and goodbye. That trough misses it. Here's the next one. That's the one that is going to bring the big temperature changes into the east. And you can see what happens as this thing moves into the east, into eastern Canada, and the trough swings down and strengthens. This one picks Fiona up and pulls it, fires it up to the northeast. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, now we're into Saturday. Take a look here down, from the southern plains out into the Atlantic, into the subtropical Atlantic, and going all the way back. You've got basically this big ridge. So the new system, which will be the H storm, I assume it will be an H before anything else develops, that is underneath this ridge. So the first trough is not even close. I mean, that ridge is like a brick wall. It's strong. It's going to force it to go to the west, at least for a while. Now, here comes this. All right. That is the follow-up trough that's going to be behind the lead trough. And you'll notice that really starts to strengthen from Lake Superior down into the southeastern part of the United States. That creates a weakness here. Okay? So there's one upper high. Here's another upper high. So now your storm, which is starting to develop, is right in this weakness. And there's just enough of a weakness here that it gets pulled northward. And that is the difference between the European and the GFS versus the Canadian. Because if that trough is not as strong as advertised, then maybe the ridge is a little stronger. That's probably why the Canadian is taking it further to the west. That trough on the European is pretty, it's potent, and then an arm comes down at the end of the forecast period, but misses it, and you see it's just sort of hanging there on the Florida Panhandle. Yeah, that's why. Beyond what we're showing in terms of what kind of tropical development we're going to have and motion, the longer term track of all of this is so uncertain. And here's the Canadian, just to give you the difference in the upper air. See, the Canadian's got the same trough, but it says that the ridge, there's just enough of a narrow connection there between the Atlantic ridge and the ridge that's in the southwest to keep this thing moving westward. It doesn't get as far north as the other two models, which is why it winds up. It responds to the weakness to an extent, but then it gets shoved back down into the southwest Gulf. And I will tell you, Joe, I've seen that happen from time to time, especially in the latter part of the hurricane season with storms in later October or early November that are coming out of the Caribbean. And sometimes they just get shoved down into the southwest Gulf because the troughs are not far enough south to grab them. So the big key to whatever this is going to do in the long term is going to hinge on that second trough. The first one picks up Fiona. The second one creates a weakness, and if it's up at around say 16, 17 north, it's going to react to that weakness and make the turn. If it's down around 12 or 13 north, it may not. And that's what it boils down to at this point, in my view.
Okay, well, we'll obviously we'll know more in the days ahead of us as to how this is going to all pan out. But I do have a certain amount of confidence that we get to the end of the month, we're going to be looking at some kind of a tropical system that'll be somewhere in the Gulf, be it the Western Gulf, Central or Eastern Gulf. Something is going to be down in that area. And then the big question is, where does it go from there? So we shall see.
Yeah, I'm looking at I'm just looking at the upper air environment here. It is going to have I wouldn't say ideal, but it does have a favorable environment. Once Fiona gets out of the way, the environment for strengthening improves quite a bit. So when it gets into the Western Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, you got a really strong upper high anticyclone, a strong upper high sitting over it. You got good outflow. So I think this has the potential of becoming a powerhouse, but we've got a long way to go as far as whether it gets there or not.
And we said we're going to have like a surface high, a big surface high at the end of the month, presumably over the Great Lakes and the Northeast. So if this thing decides to start moving northward, we may have one of those situations where the big high will try to cradle that storm. And of course, we'll also have some very strong or significant wind gradient, easterly wind gradient, perhaps along the coast. Although maybe not so much for the mid-Atlantic or southeast, because this would look like initially looks like more of an inland storm coming in through the Gulf of Mexico and coming into, let's say, the Mississippi and Tennessee River Valley. So maybe the gradient won't be all that strong. But, frictional drag will take a lot of that tropical moisture and just wring it out over the southeast, mid-Atlantic, and maybe as far as the northeastern United States as well. A lot of interesting things that are going to be happening, or potentially going to be happening over the next 10 days. So for all of you who said it was a fairly boring hurricane or tropical storm season, guess what? Everything is just woken up.
and by the way, I'll put this out there because it may become part of the conversation when we get to next week. It may not, but I think it may. There's a big difference between storms that come up the east side of the Appalachians versus systems come up on the west side. And I will go back to, I think maybe it was the 6Z run from last night. So here's an example of this was last night's 6Z run, which the GFS brought up just off the west coast of Florida. Looks like a landfall not too far south of Tampa, somewhere between, say, Port Charlotte and Tampa. And then the storm system moves up the east side of the Appalachians. So when you get storms that move up the east, now obviously you look at the map that the GFS came up with, and you see all this rain and you see all these isobars. Okay, so when they come up the east side of the Appalachians, part of the circulation remains over the open waters of the Atlantic. So that creates a problem because with part of the circulation over the open water, it slows the weakening process of these systems. And then you get an instance like Hurricane David back in 1979 was like this, which moved like a rocket ship, and we had 60 to 70 mile an hour winds for 6 or 7 hours. East side of the Appalachians is where you have a problem up the coastal plain from Georgia all the way up into New England. Now, if it goes up the west side of the Appalachians, it's a whole different game. And by the way, in this particular instance on the GFS last night, I think this was the one where it kind of basically merged it with an upper trough, and you're getting some sort of non-tropical influences here in this particular setup. Now, I'll go back to today's run because this is here on today's run. It's up into the Florida Panhandle and goes up the west side of the Appalachians, and you can see the outcome here in this particular case. You don't have a strong upper trough that's interacting with it, so it just sort of gets spent out in the Appalachians and westward, and you don't really get very much happening at all up the coastal plain. The remnants will come up, and those, there probably will be significant rainfalls depending on a track like this, but that's a short range problem. It's not something that we can get into now. But west side of the Appalachians versus east side of the Appalachians makes a huge difference.
And of course, in 1979, you mentioned David, and just a few weeks after we had David, there was Frederick, and Frederick moved along the west side of the Appalachians. We had David on the east and Frederick on the west, and they were like night and day. I mean, we hardly got much of anything out of Frederick, but we did get clobbered quite a bit in terms of rain and wind from David.
I remember even with Frederick, the forecasts at the time were, they were forecasting almost a repeat performance of of David, and it never happened because it went to the west side of the Appalachians. Hurricane Hugo, another one that went up the west side of the Appalachians, even though it came in at Charleston, it went northwest. So that produced gusty southerly winds, but it produced very little rainfall. Here's the hurricane track model guidance for this particular system, which is now 98L. And you can see they're tightly clustered until you get close to the longitude of Jamaica. And then some of them go straight west, and that would be something like what the Canadian does. And then more of them seem to want to turn it more northwest toward western Cuba. And that's where the European and the GFS are. And here's something you don't see too often. On the intensity guidance, you'll notice that a lot of the members have this a tropical storm in 24 to 36 hours. Now, looking at what it looks like on the satellite seems to be like it has a long way to go to get there, so it might take a bit longer for that to happen. But you do have a fair number of these intensity models, Joe, that already have this as a hurricane at 96 hours, which is 4 days from now, and then beyond that over the weekend and into early next week. So that's you don't see that too often. When the intensity guidance is as bullish as this is, you gotta want it's seeing something in terms of the potential for development, certainly.
Yeah, if I were doing broadcast weather, on-camera weather, and I was in New Orleans, and you were in New Orleans for a while, or somewhere in the vicinity of St. Petersburg or Tampa, and I would just simply look straight into the camera, and I would say we have something that we're going to have to keep a sharp eye on, by the middle or latter part of next week, and just leave it at that, because again, this will be something that will be worth watching as we get into the once Fiona is history. Once Fiona is out of the way completely or whatever, I'm sure everybody's attention is going to be turning to this. And while it doesn't have a name yet, it certainly looks like it's going to be Ermine by next week.
Recent recon fix here is 952 versus 953. Looks like the motion, the two plots would suggest that was moving straight north, but you really need like 3 or 4 plots at least, because sometimes they sort of dance around a little bit. And on the graph, Joe, we've got pressures down 945, 2 measurements down close to the bottom of that. Well, I'm sorry, I take it back. I always confuse them. I got to remember that the red is the pressure, but it's still somewhere under 950 here. This would be an hour ago. Just under 950, and the wind peaks that you see here are all in excess of 110 knots.
Wow,
pretty impressive.
Okay, yeah, it is.
All right, let's.
Also, another pretty impressive number is 88, not for news radio, but 88 likes so far. So, for those of you who are online right now, if you have not hit the like button for us, for our program, which is now coming up on 1 hour, do so. We'd like to get to 100 tonight. We've had 100, my count says 155 watching right now, Joe. So if you haven't done so, hit the like button. Let's get to 100, and we'll close out the show tonight on a happy note.
All right, let's do some short-range weather here, which, of course, means that tomorrow is going to be a late summer day. The GFS and the other models, looks like we're probably not going to have to worry about any showers or thunderstorms from this next cold front until sometime Wednesday night, overnight, into Thursday. It looks like the front is taking a little longer to get through, which is typical. These models, like the GFS in particular, loves to rush fronts through, and then it winds up being a good 6 to 8 hours slower. But the front now, instead of being offshore Thursday morning, is just right on the coast. So there are some and that seems to make sense because you've got this Category 4-ish hurricane off the Florida coast that's helping to, it's trying to fight that cold front that's coming southeastward, and the front amplifies in the morning with showers and storms across New England down to about Long Island and even into southern New Jersey. So it'll be interesting to see if that verifies because that doesn't look too shabby in terms of rainfall. And then after that, the big rush and the cool air comes in with this high and the ridiculously low dew points. That we're going to see temperatures, I think, Friday morning probably in the mid 40s to low 50s and not much above upper 50s to maybe low and mid 60s at best for Friday highs. And another cool night Friday night into Saturday morning. Another cool day Saturday. I was thinking, Joe, upper 60s to low 70s, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England down to northern Virginia. And then with the next trough setting up, Sunday, most of Sunday should be okay. The GFS wants to have rain on the coast by evening. You can see showers also sweeping down through the Tennessee Valley and into the Gulf states. Those sort of dry out. And then the next front comes in, and the next high starts to build. Rather, 1033 high over Lake Huron. That is a strong high for late September.
Absolutely. The one difference, Joe, because I know you've been promoting Friday as the day of the big cool down, but I quite frankly, I think on Thursday, actually tomorrow night late, with the approach of that weather front, I think tomorrow night after midnight into the early hours of Thursday, we're going to be seeing showers and possibly a few thunderstorms. We're not in the area of marginal risk for severe weather in the Hudson Valley. But still, I think we'll see a few showers and storms late tomorrow night into early Thursday. I think Thursday, we may not see temperatures much higher than 65 here. It'll also be a breezy day with winds blowing out of a west-northwest direction, gusting maybe to over 20 miles an hour. And Friday, brilliant sunshine, gusty winds. The official start of autumn, by the way, Thursday night at 9:04 p.m. But Friday, every bit of an autumn day, gusty winds, sunny skies, high temperature, I'd say within a degree or two of 64. Saturday, I've got 70, 75, a warming trend on Sunday with, again, a lot of sunshine. Looks like a pretty nice weekend ahead of us. And by the middle of next week, a surge of warmer air coming our way. We might actually be back to the lower 80s by next Wednesday. Now, tomorrow, I think, if you like warm weather, enjoy it. I think we'll get up to within a degree or two of 81. And then here comes the big cool down for Thursday and on into Friday.
All right, so here's the thing. As I'm looking at this, all right, I think the timing of the front on Thursday, if it comes through, if it comes through, say, after 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, the highs of the day will be already have achieved, sometime during the morning hours. But I don't know how you're going to go for middle, you're back into the 80s for the middle part of next week behind that second trough where you've got this big high building in for Tuesday and Wednesday, Joe. The thickness is here next Tuesday is a 552 thickness here and a 546 thickness at Binghamton. And then by Wednesday morning, the thickness is 552 from Wilmington, Delaware to eastern Long Island, 546 in western Pennsylvania. I mean,
well, maybe just a corridor of warmth before the actual push of the next push.
Right. Maybe Monday, Monday. But even there, it's going to be a tough call because it doesn't get this front is coming through Sunday night into Monday morning, and the thicknesses are not that high. I just find it difficult to imagine that it's going to. I think it's going to be pretty cool. After that second, after you get that front on Thursday, you're going to get another front that's going to come through Monday early, and then you got this big high building in.
We'll see. I'm just happy. It looks like the weekend looks like a pretty nice weekend ahead of us.
Yeah.
And then we can start getting into discussions about what happens next week with Ermine and
right.
the warm air and the cold air and that was, whatever.
Right. I'm just eyeballing it off the European, by the way. The GFS, just real quick. I mean, the GFS kind of has the same idea. It's just it's not as cool as the European is. The European has a more robust trough. But enough of that. We've gone a long way here. So hang on. Let me bring me back and bring you back.
And thank you to Izzy D, who hit Super Chats. Thank you, Izzy. Been a while since we heard from Izzy.
Yes. So here we go. So here I am. By the way, that is my Christmas tree behind me. So it doesn't get taken down because my grandkids love it. So we have a Briller. We have our Briller Jeopardy tonight, but it's Johnny Quest Jeopardy, as Scott is taking some time off this week. So let me bring up the question. This is not an easy question, by the way. So here we go. Now,
well, they also point out that Mayfire 924 hit Super Chat a second time tonight. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, so here are the questions tonight, and maybe the chat board certainly is welcome to participate in this. So we want the names of the 5 biggest hurricanes, and by biggest, we're talking about the diameter of the system. I'm not exactly sure, if that was measured from like the easternmost part of the clouds or, where the precip is. I'm guessing it's probably the clouds. But tonight, Joe, it's diameter.
Now, this is for the actual storm. This is not for the eye of the storm.
Right, not the eye, the actual storm. Basically from the diameter. So the coverage, the total coverage in miles.
Right.
All right. So I will say to you, I'll give you a couple of hints. You mentioned one tonight. You lived through one. And the other ones, I don't know. I don't know what kind of. One's, by the way, in the Western Pacific.
Okay, well, if I mentioned one, it would either be David or Frederick. I think Frederick was probably the larger and more intense of the 2 storms. So is Frederick on that list, or?
Frederick is not on the list. It was, but it's not it is, as I said, it's one of the storms you mentioned, but it's not Frederick.
So was it David?
No, it was not David. And by the way, that was the first year that they went to male-female names, 1979. Go ahead. Keep going. Keep guessing.
So
far on the chat board, George Salmon, is it Salomon? I'm sorry, Salomon. From a distance there with my glasses, I didn't see the O between the L and the M. I'm thinking you're referring to Camille, rather than Camilla. Camilla's the queen consort. So Michael Azera has named one of those storms, and so has Frank Riccio, getting the correct answer, and Christina Pedia has gotten one of the 5. And you know which one that is, Joe?
Katrina?
No, Sandy.
Sandy.
Yes.
In terms of the breadth, the total width of or diameter of the storm, I didn't think that Sandy was that big.
But apparently it was. Okay, so we have Sandy. The other ones are going to be tough to guess. But hang on a second. Andrew, yes, as Frank Riccio is pointing out to whoever said Andrew was actually very small. The hurricane force winds were only in about a 10 to 20 mile diameter. It was not, but they were, you went from nothing to gales. They're almost like crossing streets here. You went from nothing to gales to hurricane force to super hurricane force, almost tornadic force. But let's see. I don't think there was a I don't think we've had a Walter yet. But Sandy's on the list. As I said, Joe, there's one on here that you mentioned earlier.
Igor?
Igor, yes. Hurricane Igor. Category 5 Hurricane Igor. 841 miles diameter. That was number 4 on the list. Sandy was number 3 at 857. So there's 3 left. I don't think anyone's going to guess these because I might have guessed one of these. If left long enough. Remember, one of these is in the Western Pacific. and I think it still holds the record as the lowest pressure ever recorded in the Western Pacific.
I don't know.
Okay, so I'll give you a hint. When you go to a restaurant and
Yes.
you get the bill, if the service was good, you leave a
Tip.
typhoon tip. I knew you.
Oh!
Typhoon tip. Jason Schaefer got it too. Typhoon tip. Trevor McKelvey got it. Excellent. Excellent. Typhoon tip, which the diameter was 1,379 miles. And that, by the way, is number 1. So we're left with number 5 and number 2. Number 2.
So I guess Donna was not among this on this
No,
list.
I don't think anybody's going to get these, as I barely remember them. So you know what? I will give the answer here.
Ginger?
No.
No.
Number 2. Number 5 is, or as Bob Barker would have said on Miss USA, the 4th runner-up is. But number 5 is Hurricane Lily, 835 miles wide as a Cat 5.
Wow.
Which I don't remember. And
I don't remember it either.
Number 2, number 2 was Hurricane Olga, which I also don't remember. 991 miles wide. I wonder if that was also, no, that would have said typhoon. So I guess it was an Atlantic storm at some point. But those are the 2 that I think we could have been here all night. I mean, I could have run a lot of commercial breaks along the way, but yeah. I think we would have been here all night when it comes to that. So. On that particular note, as we're coming up on an hour and 15 minutes, where else can you get an hour and 15 minutes of just continuous weather but right here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show?
And thank you all. We have 124 likes, Joe. 113 people are watching now, but
Yay.
We hit 124 likes. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And Joe and I, of course, we'll be back tomorrow night at 7:30 Eastern Time. Don't forget, if you're watching on the replay and you want to hit the tip jar, you can hit Super Thanks, which is on your screen there. Don't have to, but you know what? I was able to have dinner tonight, and that's a good thing. At home.
Okay.
I'm only kidding about that. Really, it's if you want to and you feel generous, by all means. So we'll see everybody tomorrow night at 7:30 Eastern Time. Good night,
we shall be here.
Good night, Mr. Rayo.
Good night, sir.
Good night, everybody.